So the topic of today was, progressing a training from beginner to intermediate to advanced. Doesn't matter. This and that. I think we may as well just kick it off with the first question. So, Prantik, I might start with you. How
All
would you define being a beginner, intermediate, or an advanced lifter?
Mm,
Ooh, good
uh,
question.
from which perspective, though? Are you looking from the perspective of form? Are you looking from the perspective of
Just
eh,
training
Your
age, I reckon,
perspective.
is a pretty big one. Or whatever comes to your mind, really. Yeah, but training age for sure.
okay?
Bodybuilding, whatever wise you want to think about it.
So let me make this a little more easier for people to understand. So if somebody like you guys who are experienced personal trainers, sports science holders as well, like the science, you've looked into science and stuff. If you're looking at someone who's a, how would you judge if you're looking at a noob with some noob gains? Uh, or intermediate or an experienced person. So probably obviously looking at the physical form first, you'd be able to understand who's where. That's the first thing. That's the first identifiable feature. So noob gainer would be someone who would have a much more um, non-defined not skeletal musculature. And then
Hmm.
a medium gainer would be someone who kind of knows what they're doing, and they would all have a medium body type where the muscles are just starting to pop in. And then obviously advanced gainer would be like veins pop in, balls drop in, kind of stuff. Probably if you go more than advanced, then you would see baldness. That is something identifiable feature as well, if you know what I mean.
I feel like you're implying something, Prantik. Something about
Yeah.
DHT, something about trend balloon, something like
uh,
that.
but yeah, then obviously from the pattern of training, experienced person would go about certain forms of training. For example, they would know controlled eccentrics, progressive overloading, starting at a higher weight range to fatigue themselves, better warm-ups before their lifts and stuff like that, rest breaks, um, all this sort of stuff. Whereas on an intermediate or a newer beginner, you wouldn't see those things. You'd see generally with newer beginners, they just start straight up without even warming up, because they don't have that concept. Their muscle don't have that concept of going to failure. If not, they're not guided. Obviously, which I'm thinking they won't be until unless they spend a little bit time on the gym floor, or it's not only the gym or with the training, be it in any sports or something. Until someone spends a little bit of time, they're still intermediate. So that's my definition of identify a beginner, an intermediate, and an experienced person.
I like it. I like it. How about you, Nick?
Yeah, so look, beginners, like if I had to classify it, I would say a beginner is someone generally between literally they have no training experience at all, maybe up to about 2 years.
Mhm.
Um, if we're looking at them, straight on, like and you're watching them closely and seeing how they're progressing through their training, you'll probably find beginners tend to make gains in comparison to the others. Quite quite easily. Especially if they follow an intelligent program, they'll just reap benefits. But to be honest, even if they're not like training, intelligently, you'll probably still they probably sorry still get some good gains. So that's just like if you see someone like that, they're clear signs of beginners. Now, when you move into more intermediate, I would say someone between 3 and 6, 7 years of consistent training.
Mhm.
So, look at this point, like if someone's within that bracket, like I wouldn't say, like they can get away with just fluffing around. Not at all at this point. I mean, you really need to start thinking about those stimulus to fatigue ratios, because at this point you might start reaching plateaus.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and look, at that point people might drop off. So because they don't know what to do. So finding a great coach to help them progress further is definitely, you'll probably find a lot of trainers out, like, I mean, gem pop people out there that are within that range tend to go for a lot of coaches and things like that, just because they need that extra progression. um Advanced lifting, like I said, so that bracket before was 3 and 6. I would say advanced lifting was more 6, 7+ years.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, shit gets fucking hard. Like you have to be real on point with your training cycles, like your food, even down to your exercise selection, how often you take deloads. We've spoken about how more advanced lifters, are quite strong, especially if they're into the powerlifting and things like that. So just really how you structure your training, how often you take deloads, like everything matters at that point. But I will say this, even though I've like kind of giving you guys a range in terms of, oh, these are the training ages and things like that. Like you could be an everyday gym goer for like 6 years, but you could be real shit. Like you could be taking
Mm-hmm.
heap of time off. Like there's no consistency whatsoever. That doesn't mean you're an intermediate lifter. Like you could be on and off for 6 years and still have shit form, still have, you know, poor exercise programming and things like that. And, like you're not considered an intermediate, because the moment you do start, making your training, like you pick up how well your training and things like that, you might actually reap beginner gains just from changing how well you train. So yeah, these are just general guidelines, but like I said, yeah, if you're training like shit, those age ranges don't really matter much at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I tend to agree pretty strongly in the age ranges. I don't know who made them up, for what reason, and how the hell they determined that. From, you hear different things all the time. I've heard 0 to 1 years beginner, 1 to 2 years intermediate, 2+ is advanced. I've heard all the way things from like you need to be 20+ to be advanced. Who the hell is defining it and on what measures?
Mm-hmm.
One thing you got to understand with training is, trying to reap adaptations, and why some of this topics so matter is because the more you train across your career, the harder it is to reap adaptations, right? So often it is a little bit easier at the start. So imagine I talk about thresholds, right? So how much you need, kind of like a test at school. What do you need to pass? Sometimes it's 30%, sometimes it's 70%, sometimes it's 100%, right? So with beginners, I think you might look at it like this. I'm honestly making this up completely on the fly. You could just get some of the principles right, like some of the macro principles right, and you'll progress.
Mm-hmm.
When you are into intermediate, you probably need a lot of nearly all the macro principles to be in place. When you're advanced, you need all the macro and micro principles to be in place. Something like that, because imagine with that threshold, right? When you're really new, imagine you can tick 100 boxes, but you're used to doing 0. If you
Mm-hmm.
tick 5 out of 100 boxes, that's an overloading stimulus. It's going to bring adaptations. Eventually you adapt. 5's not good enough. You need to progress higher and higher and higher. Now, that's one of the things that Nick was mentioning of training ages. Sometimes people can train for 20 years, but they haven't ticked so many different boxes. Their thresholds are still quite low.
Mm-hmm.
So people often as well like try and brag about being advanced with being a lifter. It is a worse thing to be advanced as a lifter. You want to find all the parts in your training that make you look like a beginner, because they are the biggest opportunities for your adaptations in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you define it? Some people do lifts, but again, there's issues with that. Some people will say, for example, once you hit 1 times bodyweight squat, you're out of the beginner stage into intermediate. Once you hit 2 times bodyweight squat, you're going from intermediate to advanced. But what if someone, could only do like 5 kilos, like their squat originally, and they've progressed like 20 times above that now to 100, and another person just walked into the gym at 120 and is only up to 180 now,
Mm-hmm.
It's only 1.5 times the improvement. And one person's progressed, 60 kilos, the other person's progressed 95 kilos. Like, the same with physique, you see some people, well, what the hell would you call Phil Heath when he just hadn't walked into the gym before? I've trained for years. I don't look as good as Phil Heath did before he even trained. So it's like, again, it's always relative to the individual and what you've done, Yeah, and if you've got genetics, past, you've got this and that clouding your judgment, it all means nothing. So it's all relative to how much effective training you've done and how many of the thresholds you've ticked off. That's my thoughts there, at least.
No, definitely agree, 100%.
Nice thoughts.
Yeah. So moving on. What primarily do you think beginners should focus on? Prantik, start off with you.
Okay, so this is very important, and I feel like The immediate attention for a beginner when he walks in should be the form. First, kind of what kind of lifts they're doing, because if the roots, as it says, if the roots are rotten, then there is no point for the tree to grow. And that's something that I just made up. Uh,
Oh, that was amazing. How good was that, Nick?
I fucking love it. That was great. I
Perfect.
just made that up.
Do we wrap up the podcast here?
Uh,
All right, see you next week, guys.
but
Anyway, Frontics Rotten Roots. Carry on.
but yeah, I think form is very important, because what a lot of beginner people tend to do is just enjoy themselves, and that's not what you want to do when you first walk into them, because then your experience will be bad. You come back in with a sore back, like Connor was mentioning the other week. He can't wait to get back to the gym because everything is just more and more of back involvement. Connor is lifting the bar up from the back, from the ground up, and then be it lunges or deadlifts, and by the time you're done, you really have a sore back. uh, this is what the new beginners try to generally incorporate, and this is where they go wrong. For example, it's a very simple example. For example, when I was training and I was really doing those heavy repetitions on those probably 120 I think I went up to 120 pounds. I was really directed to not move those weights over a longer section of the gym. I was rather directed to set my bench up right in front of the rack where the 120s are, so that when I'm ready to do it, I'm just going to take it off the rack, sit down, and then just lift it, so that I don't waste that extra energy lifting it up all the way from the ground onto my knees and then just pushing it up there. So those are a few concepts that comes with training pattern and time. uh, those are very important concepts. And then this is where the beginners go wrong, is like they try to pick up those heavy weights. Sometimes ego lifting also pops into the play, but that should also be ruled out. uh, Better form leads to better gains over a longer period of time. So here we're talking about longevity, not quick forms and quick gains. So that's what.
cool.
Yeah.
Nick.
Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, so you basically summed up that last point quite well. Like, when you talk about form, or those people that are, lifting so much heavy weight when they're just first walking to the gym, like, if you're looking at like more powerlifters, for example, they're some of the strongest people in the world. The advanced people are some of the strongest people in the world. But the beginners, you'll probably find that they do a lot more hypertrophy blocks than they probably would strength and peaking blocks, depending on where their competitions are at, right? So the more advanced they get, the less hypertrophy work they would probably be doing in comparison to the others. But if you're a gen pop person just walking into the gym, why should your attitude change? Like, these guys that are training for strength, they're doing the work to try and get bigger muscles. So hypertrophy training is something that you should be focusing on.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a beginner, like, compound exercises are great, like technique above all else. Like, yeah, we talk about how load is important, but proper execution goes quite a long way. So I think another aspect to look at too is beginners also, they've come from their current lifestyle habits, right? So whatever their day job is, or if they're a video game nerd, or if they're whatever it might be, right? If they're transitioning into something new, like going to the gym, I think they need to realize is they don't necessarily need to go to the gym 6 days a week, follow the Arnold program, doing 130 sets of calves or something like that per week. Like they don't necessarily need to do that. It's about making that transition as smooth as possible. So
Mm-hmm.
try and, like, you don't need to train twice a day. I don't care what bodybuilding.com article says that you don't need to do that. Keeping your training sessions honestly between like maybe a maximum of 4 days per week, but as low as 2, just something that you can kind of start off to get consistent with.
Mm-hmm.
I would say you can hit muscles relatively frequent. Like, I'm assuming, like, I'm taking more of a person that's smaller. Like, obviously, if you're a big guy with big muscles, if you come from a rugby background or something like that, things kind of change a little bit. But Look, so when you're looking at rep ranges, again, like if you're someone with bad form, you don't have much good technique through your lifting or anything like that. Look, I wouldn't go too crazy on the high rep ranges. There's obviously too much of a bad thing. You don't want to perform a squat terribly 20 times kind of thing, right? So I think a good learning rep range is somewhere between 5 and 10. I think that's generally fine. But again, as Conor was saying before, there's so many people that are different. You got someone coming in that can move great, has great execution. What they're even though they're in that bracket of whatever, they could just be far more advanced than this person that doesn't lift very well. So again, you can advance them and maybe play around with things a little bit more when it comes to those rep ranges. But again, if we're just looking at a person that it's just a straight up beginner, doesn't have as much muscle mass and needs to improve their technique, I think those principles that I just mentioned apply quite well to them. Conor?
Nicely put.
Cool. Yes, so I think in a big conceptualization picture, we'll start off there and then you can almost zoom into the specifics afterwards. So with like Prantik's tree example, it's about the base. Or if you look at a pyramid, it's at the base, right? So you have the base at the bottom and you can kind of build up. So you'd almost consider that laying the foundation. You might have heard that phrase. So a lot of that stuff's going on. So I think part one is figuring out, okay, how can you stay in this for the long game? Because, there's part of like moving up that pyramid is how long you can be there. So you need to look into adherence first, because that's the first thing that usually gets people. That's the first thing that gets in the way of beginners' results. That is the main thing, because as we've discussed, often you don't need to do too much. Usually it's just doing nothing that's going to hurt them the most, So from there, you have that kind of principle of just laying the base and what's going to help me for the most amount of time into the future. So we've discussed things like technique, for example, and like if you do bad technique at the start, well, you're going to be more likely to be injured in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Your overall muscle mass you will develop won't be as much. It's not going to be able to build as high a peak. The foundation isn't as wide. You look at your thresholds and stuff like that. If you look at the performance enhancing drug community, it's very prevalent there for people to understand, okay, I'm just getting into gear. I'm not going to start off on like 2 grams of test, 1 gram of trend, and stuff like that. It's common knowledge to start low because you don't need too much. But sometimes that isn't really properly translated to the training world. The same principle applies there. The threshold's still low, just like those receptors are really sensitive. So your muscle cells in the gym, you don't need too much. You can afford to start low. So I think, setting a wide base based around adherence and then understanding, the overall training principles. The more you can understand these things, the better. Like you're saying, understanding what overloading is, understanding stress recovery adaptation, it's understanding good technique, things like that. That will help you the most. So definitely a strong technique focus, because I can tell you what, it's really annoying. Again, we always need to a little bit to watch our technique. But again, during a set, your brain can only hold so many thoughts, especially if you're trying to go hard. If you're trying to think of, oh, this hurts, I'm trying to push hard, and what's my form like at the same time? It's a little more difficult than just having it automatically, okay, my form is good, I can only think about effort now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot handy. So you get that base and you only can really think about one thing. Granted, it won't happen all the time. Things will pop up in the way. That's life. But you can sort out a big chunk of that at the start. Like Nick was saying, with how much beginners need to do, we talk about principles. So one of them is stress recovery adaptation curve. So, how long does it take you to recover between bouts? That exact same principle that makes the advanced person train once every 4 or 5 days, the larger muscle groups, is the exact same principle that tells you a newer beginner trainer to train body parts pretty much as frequently as they can adhere to. It's the same thing, because you train, you need to recover from that. When you're new, you're just not recovering from that much. A, because we decided we don't need to do too much. But B, the muscles aren't as big. The nervous system demands it can't be as big because you're not really coordinating as much muscle mass. Things like that. So I think really centering your training when you're new about, okay, how do I learn the basics of nutrition? How do I learn the basics of training? How can I make sure I stick to them? Probably a good idea to have an overlooking eye, because how long has it taken us to learn all these different things? We're all still learning. Imagine how much this process could have been like fast-tracked if you knew someone at the start. I know I massively regret some of the terrible things I did at the start of my training. I screwed up my newbie gains, and it's going to hurt my potential forever. it'll be so easy to just look into some better information, because figuring out's a long road. If you do happen to know it all at the start, great, you're in a great position. But definitely look outwards to make sure we can learn those principles and how to adhere to things. So definitely where I'd start with beginners and how they should look at things.
Love it. That's
Nice.
great. There's some key takeaways there for you, ladies and gentlemen. Now moving on from beginners, we're going to go to how does it change being
Hold on.
advanced. So Prantic,
Hold on.
shut the fuck up and don't ever. So moving on from beginners, we are now going to be discussing how does it change when you become more advanced. So Prantic, can you tell us your what happened to your tongue then? Huh? Got a little bit
Advanced
little fancy.
journey.
Okay, all right. That's some advanced techniques, if I might say. All right, go for it, mate.
Let's start off where I just discussed the form the other time, when we are talking about the heavy lifting patterns, the 110 pounds weights and how to move them. Those are some signs, telltale signs as to you're advanced, and you know that you can't injure yourself. Then you compromise your next training, something like that. Stuff like those, and then a lot more things coming into the play. For example, using belts, like supportive devices, for example belts, knee wraps, wrist straps, chalk. Even beginners use chalk, but like perfect use of chalk and the time of utilization of chalk, and then stress on the body, getting work done on it. For example, getting deep tissue massages more frequently now. The newer things like cupping has come into play a lot more. um, Dry needling, all the sort of things are some things that you're looking for in an advanced athlete who knows what it requires for the body. The second thing is also meal. So you see a lot of intermediate and a lot of newer people get away with doing a wrong meal plan, or like timings are off the charts. But an advanced athlete would obviously keep their meals on time, or what they're eating also in check. For example, they wouldn't like occasionally pop out for ice creams and stuff like that. They would, but it's different ball game altogether. Um, so from the utilization of extra supportive gear, by gear I mean like devices that will enhance their lift. Oh, this is going the wrong way, sorry. Wrist straps, physical involvements, let's put it that way. Wrist straps, knee wraps, and all those sort of things that actually bolster their lift. That's definitely an advanced lifter. The form is obviously much better, because by this time they are already like they already know what they're doing, what they're hitting. Other telltale signs are slow eccentrics, better mind to muscle connection, execution of their lifts, and obviously a shirt off gym selfie at the end of the end of the session.
Sign of advance.
Finding
I
the
think
better
some
lights.
cool things there. Yeah, that's the main key, right? A lot of good before and afters has just been good lighting, right? I think I want to touch on something you said and ask a question back to you. So you're talking about knee wraps and this and that, but I think the part that was more interesting was when you talked about the other person getting away with the ice cream and stuff like that. It's starting to allude to the mindset difference between a beginner and an advanced person.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on that and how it changes? Did you have any experiences yourself, like you had a particular mindset when you're a beginner, and how did your gym brain mature and stuff like that? Yeah. Do you have any thoughts there on the mindset?
Like Kai Green says, is the mind and muscle connection. So what I think about the mind and muscle connection is basically what you reap when you first start getting into the gym, and then you see those gains, and then it's all a thing about liking the thing. If you don't really like how you look, you will never stick to what you are. But if you really are focused on the fact that, okay, I don't look so much as I expect right now, but I can be there. um that's when you know you are in here for the long haul, because a lot of people do transformations and then they just give up on it, and then they just roll back to where they were. But then if you have that urge to go back up that mountain, and really push that rock up the mountain, then that's when you know you're sticking to it. So that's when your thing is of adherence to the diet and adherence to that mindset comes in, Connor. um, because that's when you know that, okay, I'm here, I can do it again, I've done it once, so I can do it again, I can
Mm.
go back to it. So that's the
Yeah, okay.
mindset.
There you are. Yeah. So the person to start, it's not so much they couldn't push the I think you said the rock up the mountain or something like that.
Yeah.
Even if they physically could, I think you're also alluding to when you're more advanced, they might feel, oh, this is really hard to push a rock up the mountain. Okay, the equivalent, one person start is at 40 kilos is a hard squat. Eventually it's 200 is a hard squat. But what you're really saying is, okay, I've dealt with hard squats before,
Mm-hmm.
wherever that number is, and I've dealt with it and I've succeeded. So that's the example of like pushing up that mountain. I can now achieve it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah,
Can also be
how
a weight,
much
weight
do you,
loss story, it can also be a weight loss
yeah,
story for some people.
I've lost 5 kilos now, I can lose 10. Like things like that,
Yeah.
Do you have any did you have that actually in your training career? Like, I know you're still going and stuff like that. Speaking of you, like you're retired just because you're off the juice. But when you started like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. What was it like? Because I remember one time you put on 170 kilos on the bar and you'd only done 140 kilos before.
That was progress.
I don't know if you're just out of your freaking mind or there's something a little bit more to that. Like you went to some place or you just there was some reason you knew you could do it, even though it's a 30-kilo jump. Yeah, what
think
was going through your head?
I think it's the belief that matters, Connor. The fact
Hmm.
that I was obviously at that time I was on a comp brain kind of thing, where I was like thinking really forward that I have to get on stage, get those deficits out of my body, look the best I have ever looked. Um, get those round muscle bellies as well, and pack in as much size as I can. A lot of things goes on, and especially when you're comping for the first, second, third time, that's when you know what your deficits are, and that's when you like that. As for the coming back to the example where I did the 30-kilo jump, for
Hmm.
I believe that this is where the training pattern comes in. I believe that at 40 I was feeling really strong, and I don't know if I was on caffeine that night, but I felt really strong at that 140. So I think I repped
Yeah.
out 8 or 10 easy on that. Um,
Hmm.
so that's why I took the jump of 30. I'm like, let's see. I obviously failed at, at the second rep. I think I did one rep or something like that. I think so. I
Hmm.
did one rep. But I had knee reps on, and so the concept before that was like I did like this sport and I was adhering to it. I was competing. So uh,
Hmm.
I guess that was the love
Yeah.
for the sport.
But that belief was now there for you.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
that's the big
100%.
word, that belief.
Because
Do you reckon that belief was always there or slowly cultivated over time?
I think it's more like it's something that comes over time,
Yeah.
as like you never are born a bodybuilder, but you make
Hmm.
yourself into one, or a power lifter.
Yeah.
You're never born like that. I'm pretty sure. Look at Nick 10 years ago when you're that thick chubby kid coming back from America. You never thought.
Come on,
Have you ever
come on,
thought?
man.
Have
Come
you
on,
ever
man.
thought you would be a power lifter today? But look at your lifts today. Like impressive, nice lifts, good form, a lot more knowledge, a lot more science in your bag, and now you've developed a passion for it. And now we are sitting.
Mhm.
Who knew we are sitting here doing a podcast on what we know? So we are never born podcasters, vloggers. I would like to take this time to direct you to my vlog, which is right up here.
I like it.
No,
Pimp it out.
but I'm saying that
Yeah.
this all ties back down to the fact that nobody is born somewhere. Like you have the liking for it, then you try it, and then you like it. Okay, I
Hmm.
like it, and then you do it, and then you develop passion for it, and then you just it's
Yeah.
just like that. You're
I
willing
think
to
it
push
kind of
that rock up the
yeah,
hill.
it kind of speaks to the like the last question. I would we're going to talk about like advance, but some of the stuff you're saying here, I guess, further solidifies the importance of just staying in at the start. Again, finding those things you can adhere to, this and that.
Mm-hmm.
Because people will talk about like, does it get easier? Well, if you might look at it in a few senses, like you might say, well, 40 kilo squat, as I was saying before, won't work for every of you. It's getting harder. But at least, again, a 10 out of 10 RPE is always going to feel like a 10 out of 10 RPE. It's always going to feel stuff. But at least the one part of it that you could say is easier is that you've done it before.
Yeah.
Like you're saying. So that's one part of just solidify those things, get through, and those like adversities with struggling with those kind of things. It gets progressively easier with time.
Mm-hmm.
So you just got to get through that freaking stage,
Mm-hmm.
Get the ball rolling. Yeah. Nick, what changes being advanced in your lifting?
Good question. I really liked your guys' topic. I was like listening to that. I'm like, this is gonna be a little different to what I was about to talk about, but I really like this conversation right now. Anyway, so all right, I'll take it from two standpoints again, from mainly physique people, I guess powerlifting. So if we're coming from more of the strength side of things, so if you're more advanced, actually, if you look into a bit of Chad Wesley Smith stuff, he talks more about how the more advanced lifter you are, like let's say it comes to competition time, that look, I'll just to say first and foremost, things will differ from people to people. Like there's no exact this is the method, but generally, like you would see in powerlifting, that there is a little less hypertrophy blocks, and probably more strength and more peaking, just depending on again when competition is. I remember a video he talks about how advanced lifters probably take more time to peak in comparison to a beginner who doesn't really need as long to peak for competitions. So again, like how you structure your yearly planning and things like that will just look completely different. So like I mentioned before, how a beginner, you'll probably see a bit more hypertrophy blocks. Advanced lifters, you'll probably see a little bit less of that. Still some there, of course. And like I said, depends from person to person. But again,
so why do you think?
Go.
Sorry to cut in, but why do you think it changes? As a beginner, you do more hypertrophy and more advanced. Maybe we'll explain that.
Yeah, cool. So, like, look, if you've seen people like Chad himself, he's a big dude, right? You look at people like Eric Lillybridge. These guys are massive units, right? And you got to think about the demands their body would take going through hypertrophy blocks, right? So the more they do that, I guess, like again, they'll be beneficial. It'll be beneficial there, but the more they do that, I guess the more it takes away from them being real specific towards their competition, right? So it will take a lot longer for them to recover from. So we talk about the bigger you are, right, the longer it takes you to recover. So I guess as they're getting closer and closer to competition, like we talk about how the stimulus is so high that you need to reach, they just need a lot more time to get there. So you look at someone like Eric Lillybridge, apparently he takes at least two, like I think he kind of swaps. Can't really remember at the top of my head, but he might deadlift every like 2 weeks, right, kind of thing. So in between those weeks might be like a lighter session, right? But weeks 1 and 3 are those heavier sessions. He's taking 2 weeks to literally recover from these things. So you can imagine if you're like an advanced powerlifter doing like hypertrophy block after hypertrophy block, it's almost like how much more bigger do you need to get, right, for the lifts that you need to do, right, for the sport that you're in. If you're at that point where they're massive, like I said, depends on person to person. Some might need it, some might not, right? But if you're someone that's just needing to get a lot stronger, so the muscle that you do have can get stronger, it's good at that point to spend more time doing more strength blocks. But if you're a beginner, right, like if you kind of just put it out there, like they won't, I don't see the need for them to do as many peaking blocks as an advanced person would. Honestly, they could like I said, advanced people could do 2 straight peaking blocks, whereas a beginner might just do 1. Hope that answers your question.
does. And I think one thing I'll just quickly jump on add there. So as Nick was alluding to with, a powerlifting performance, oversimplified, but it can come down to two things, like how much muscle mass you got and how you can use it.
Mm-hmm.
Or the use it part is technique. I might just mute myself and edit.
Cool. All right. So if I'm going to more physique people,
Hold up, sorry. I'm just saying we paused because of the sound in the background. I was muting myself.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. We'll just edit and we'll just resume. Okay, cool. Yes, adding to the point you're talking about just there with, the powerlifting stuff like that. I guess you could say you got two parts of the equation that you're looking at. You got how much muscle mass you got and how do you use it. So technique, neural efficiency, all those things. Your mindset is all things that kind of tie into how you use it, if you really look at it, right? So I think when you're, again, the more advanced you are, the more your thresholds change. So when you are a beginner, doing just a squats in the 5 rep range, you could say that's arbitrary strength, right? Progressing that to 10 is enough of a threshold and stimulus to see gains. It'd be now a hypertrophy block. As you get more advanced, it's like, well, it might be squats from 5 to 10. Well, the 10 part might be a little better than 5. However, how good is a squat for hypertrophy? It might be good. It might not be perfect. It might be better to do something else. And then eventually you got to not just add, a better exercise selection and rep range. You've also got to add more specific tempos. Then you got to do, not using your reps and like all that stuff. Again, you keep adding things that are actually further away because, again, the further you are away from something, or the less you banged it away at it, if that makes sense. So you've been really doing a lot of powerlifting work, your hypertrophy work's more fresh, but also how much it splashes over along the spectrum. Imagine here's strength, here's hypertrophy. You're probably more trained. You need to reach things all the way out here. So you need to chuck everything you can, at a particular stimulus. So we said exercise selection, we said rep range, we said tempo. We now need to change our frequency. We now need to change our, it could be like nutrition. Point being, we need to change more and more. So imagine that spectrum. The lifts you need to do, it needs to be ultra like variation in a sense from this, just by nature. And I guess it's always a benefit in powerlifting to have more muscle. But I think you got those two things, which is, well, it's a desensitizing game. How much muscle mass can you accrue? Obviously it's easier to gain muscle mass as a beginner than advanced. The neural side of things, again, things always desensitize and stuff, but you've always got similar room there. It's kind of like, you get better and better at it versus you get more desensitized at it. If that makes sense. So you got that part of things. It's hard to gain as much muscle mass. But then on the other side of things, to get that perfect muscle mass stimulus, which you need at this point because you're so freaking advanced, it is fucking looking so different from your work. So to get you all the way from over here, all the way to, your peak 1RM, it's just a longer road than, I did squats for 4 this week and then next week you did 6 for gaining size. I mean, fuck, it's not going to take you long to get good at squatting for 4, 3, 2, 1. You know what I mean? Versus you change every exercise, this and that, So it definitely is a harder game as you get advanced, yeah.
Very nice. How much for training?
How much for training?
$1 billion.
Yeah, that was more of the So yeah, when I was talking about that was more of the strength side of things. But if I had some couple notes that talk about, I guess, the physique side. I mean, I think Prantik, you mentioned the mind muscle connection and stuff like that before. I mean, like if you're a physique competitor, I guess maximizing tension on the target muscles at that point. When you become advanced, again, for a beginner, like there's some similarities that come involved there as well. But, as you get more advanced, those kind of things start to become a lot more crucial. I think having a good exercise library is relatively important. I know Mike Israel talks about this, but like, what was I going to say? So, things can, your training can get quite fatiguing. So, having specific exercises under your belt, like at the moment, I'm not sure how I 100% feel in this, but like, I mean, I think he could have a better exercise library if I could recommend, but hey, I'm not him. But I know, his training at the moment is demanding a lot, but he's taking, say, a full lateral range just through its full range of motion. Do I think there's better exercise out there? 100%. Why does he do it? For those stimulus to fatigue ratios. So look, like that's him. That's him choosing something. But again, it is something that you can look at. We've talked about, how important it is for advanced people to reach those thresholds, as Conor said. So training towards your MRV, or your maximal recoverable volume, is very, very important. Another thing I actually kind of want to talk about too is I guess a good way to structure things is, like I've tend to done things like this, but Conor, I'm not sure if you've ever done or like training like this. But when you're looking at, let's say you got 3 different mesocycles or something like that, in a row, something I like to do is like maybe that first mesocycle might be more of a lower volume, heavier low kind of thing. But then as you progress, you kind of progress to like elevated volume, maybe lighter ranges. I think they call it reverse linear. I've read it in a book of it's called Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy. It's actually quite interesting. I've done things like that, but it could be a good idea if you're more advanced. You can't necessarily just train heavy and heavy and heavy all the way around. Again, you might just be accumulating a lot of fatigue at that point. So it might be a good idea to structure different mesocycles differently in that reverse linear nature versus, like your traditional linear, which is highest volume, lowest intensity, and there's kind of reverse, whereas this is the opposite. Nutrition, like we said it before, don't fucking slack off. Like at this point, recovery is so, important. You got people out there like Jordan Peters, for example, who trains 0 reps in reserve all year round. So if this guy can, wake up every morning and, eat right, recover well, and, gain a new stimulus every session, so can you. So don't fucking forget that shit. Don't be a fuckwit. All right, that's all I have to say about these advanced people. So,
Don't be a fuckwit.
yeah, don't be a fuckwit. Conor, I'm sure you got other things you want to talk about.
For advanced lifters, yeah. So it's pretty much understanding that, like that example I was saying before of ticking off boxes. You're just at a state where now you need to tick 80 to 100 boxes, and that 80 is eventually going to become 85. So basically, with almost, okay, here's the thing with periodization. So people talk about like variations as how much stuff changes. And they talk about specificity. That's like, consistently doing certain stuff and getting adaptations out of it, right? You almost need to be more specific what you do inside of a block. So let's say continuum of 4 weeks. You can't afford to fuck around with too many different things. So you might have heard of like daily undulating periodization, who would have like a power day, a volume day, and a strength day or whatever. That works a lot better in advance. If you look at the bodybuilding side of things, you might have like a metabolic stimulus start of the workout, like a pump thing. Then you go into something heavy, then you go to something damage. That could work at the start because then all those thresholds are low. As you get more advanced, there isn't enough recovery to spread around to all those different adaptations and still do enough of it. So you need to eventually be like, okay, I'm going to stick to very certain things in these blocks, but then there'll be even more variation between blocks. Basically, you need to be super specific in what you're doing. You need to tick off like, again, the 80 to 100 boxes there. Because you need to get everything right. You can't be like, I'm going to do some other stuff today because that's going to bring you back down to 50 out of 100 boxes. But then the magic is when you do that, you can switch to another, style of stimulus. And now because it's resensitized, you only need to tick off 50 to 60. Then next week you need to do 70, 80, 90. Again, so it's a combination of more variation between different blocks and stuff like that. Again, there still needs to be some principles of like tracking and making sure you're getting better and stuff like that. But when you're actually saying to a task, you need to be right on it. So I was saying before, your macro and micro principles need to be on for the particular thing, and you need to respect it, you need to milk it, and then you need to change it because at this stage, the adaptations, aren't as readily available as with being a beginner. Again, principles are always there. There's often how it looks changes. We talked about like frequency before. We always don't want to do too much frequency because we can't recover. The adaptations aren't there. You don't want to do too little. Then that's when you start to detrain and you've lost all the benefits of training. how long that is, that just changes, right? So it just looks different. Exact same principle, it just looks very different from beginner and advanced. All the reasons are exactly the same, it's just a different outcome. There's a lot of there's a lot of those style of things in the advanced athletes. So you just got to nail the principles and probably micro principles. So again, a big part of it is you've done so much, just picking up, the small little cracks, the dotting the I's, the crossing the T's, those kind of things. So really getting all your stuff together, moving away from it, resensitizing, taking advantage of like, okay, I've been doing this now, there's a little gap here. You're trying to find those little gaps essentially in every single variable of your program design. So, exercise, reps, sets, blah, blah, everything.
Nice. Very
Conor,
nice.
you quickly mentioned about undulation. Look, for listeners out there, if you train, with undulated styles or conjugate, or anything like that, we apologize for just, completely crushing your dreams that you'll never be big. But I was just gonna bring up, would you say, like, because let's say there are people like that out there that enjoy simply just training those necessary styles and they become more advanced and things like that, and it's just something they love and adhere to. Would you say it's more of a because would you say it's better for if you're literally just trying to maintain, like it's actually a decent
To do conjugate?
maintenance? Yeah.
Or like a variation of, okay, just hit, but I guess that's what you're doing because, again, imagine at the start you need to do this much and eventually you need to do this much, but this plus this equals that, and you can only recover from that. Very handy for visual audience, audio ones, like what the hell is it talking about? So if you look at that, because like things advance and you're now doing,
you can use numbers,
Conor, and spread out to your, okay, imagine you could recover from 24 sets of arbitrary stimulus. 8 was like 1 rep maxes, another 8 was like 10 rep maxes, another 8 sets were like 50 rep maxes. It's really spread out, right? Eventually, it'd be really handy. You need to get better 10 rep maxes. I need to do 10 sets arbitrarily. But again, I can't still do 8 and 8 because now you're overtrained because you only recover from 24. That's essentially what I was getting at. The point being, like with those ones, again, those numbers are way too high. It's a handy way of maintaining a lot of things at the same time. So it's actually very handy for CrossFit because CrossFit in its nature, you need to be good at a bunch of random different things. So I do it a little bit differently. I'd reverse engineer how long it takes to detrain certain effects and pull that away from the competition at the appropriate time and stuff like that. But if you need to be good at multiple things, then it's handy to have a little bit of everything. Off season would actually be more specificity stuff in terms of actually getting better and returning to like a just balance out all the different parts. That's why it's so terrible. But then like powerlifting, you need to be good at these particular things at the moment. Well, hey, you're going to work more towards that in variation off season, So let me just summarize. So I think you're asking, is it a handy way for maintenance, a conjugate style? It can be. Again, it can cover a lot of bases, but what for? And are you going to ever move from it? I guess not really. You need to juggle around some things to make up some more room recovery-wise so you can actually do more of the particular thing you want to get better at. And you even look at like the classic fucking... I mean, there's so many issues with using like a West Side system as an example. There's so many issues with... because there's so many other variables involved, right? If I had to look at West Side, how much of their success would have been, down to the variation within a week and not like adjusting things, around the year versus how much was it an environmental thing? The nature of that environment encouraged people with particularly high levels of dopamine and high levels of testosterone. They are really good prerequisites for being good powerlifters. They just are. So you almost just 100%. Bring in the good people. It's like the Bulgarian system and like another completely other end of the spectrum thing. Basically, let's do a ridiculous workload that will kill you. If you survive, you're good. It's really just a weeding out process. So is Westside in a way. It's just going to get rid of assholes. It's going to get rid of most everyday people, right? And then people only people are left there are like the elite. And while the elite do well, no shit, Sherlock. That was always going to be a thing, whatever system it is. So in a weird way, it can be a weeding out thing. But then again, look, if it helps you adhere and stuff like that, cool. But again, beginner, benefit from it. Intermediate, or starting to see some issues. Advanced, definitely going to see some issues.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Sweet. So that brings us to our final topic, which are, what are some similarities that we see between all of these? I know we've kind of briefly touched on things as we've gone, But just to kind of finish up on it, Prantik, so what would you say are some similarities between beginners, intermediates, and advanced?
First of all, showing up to the gym. Uh,
Yeah,
you know,
it's a good point.
coming to the gym. That's obviously something that here we're talking about really beginners who are really into this. It's not like, oh, I'm just following a friend and just coming in. Beginners who are here to make changes in life, not in life, in the physique or in the goals that they have. They are here with some goals. Same goes for intermediates, people who are really want to stick in on to it, and obviously advanced who have already stuck onto it for several years and are still willing or determined to go a step further with the training. I think this is the similarity that I find in between a beginner, an intermediate, and an expert lifter. Nick, what about you? What are the similarities?
um, Oh, just to quickly jot off a few. I mean, technique is something that all lifters should be looking at. I think frequency again has this role in all levels of lifting. Like whether it's high, medium, low. Again, it's something that all levels of training should be looking at. The amount of stimulus that you put on your body still matters. Doesn't matter if you're a beginner. Well, like you might not need as much, but like again, still matters. Beginners, they need to deload eventually, not as much, but still need to, because life gets in the way. Sometimes you got uni exams, and sometimes like you got high school exams. Sometimes stress kicks in. Like you training hard and you're accumulating a lot. Eventually, you still need to deload. Intermediates more specifically can, just like advanced lifters, can push towards their maximal recoverable volume, hit maybe close to 0 reps in reserve. I mean, there are probably similarities between them too. For beginners, depending on the person, yes, if they're not a very good, I shouldn't say it like that, but like they're more on the lower level side of beginners, maybe not so much, but just to name off a few, yeah, there's some things at the top of my head. I would say some similarities. Connor.
Yeah, exactly the same. So you look at that, basically all the principles are always the same. Principles are principles because they apply at every level. That's why it's not rules, it's principles that matter more. So if you had a really good principle, it would apply to the green frog and it would apply to the red elephant. That was a really random example, but it applied to the beginner, it applied to intermediate, it applied to the advanced, but just things would change around it. What is similar? Well, again, the whole freaking approach, it's always progress. It's always just looking at where you're at and trying to improve. Again, some of the things you need to improve need to change, but ideally, it's the exact same thing. You look into, again, all those principles to find out how we can progress. It's just easier answers sometimes when you're a beginner. But again, the whole thing as a whole is really there. You'll notice, again, we always talked about, when you're a beginner, you want to nail the basics. Doesn't mean basic exercises, but just basics in general. That still needs to be there when you're beginner or advanced. When we're talking about, imagine we're talking about like having a wide base of the pyramid and you peak up. If you just like now, with the beginner stage, do that, that's great. When you're advanced, if you're focusing so much on there that you're sacrificing principles that are going to crumble the ground beneath you, there's going to be issues there. The peaks can go whoop, and fall to the ground.
Collapse.
So look, exactly. So the whole approach just needs to be there. You need to be honest with yourself. You need to look into how can I improve, and you need to find the means to do it. That's always going to be there. So
very nice.
Yeah.
All
right.
So
Boom shakalaka.
Kalaka. So I guess we took away a good chunk of information from the session that we did today. How to classify starting from how to classify and identify beginners, intermediates, advanced, going on to training patterns, correct training patterns, adherence to the final goal, the mindset being present there, and obviously some similarities between beginner, intermediate, and advanced.
And I think my key takeaway for the audience out there is like, no matter what stage you're at, don't try and rush to be at the next stage.
Mm-hmm.
So don't try and rush to be an advanced lifter because
Mm-hmm.
advanced lifters just sounds, amazing. Like as we all discussed previously, it's hard. It's very hard. So just aim for progress, and be consistent at it, adhere to it, and honestly enjoy it, have fun, reap the benefits of it.
Always have
You're
a
very-
dream to have a dream.
Yeah. You always need goals and dreams. That's right. If you're rushing to be advanced, you'll very quickly learn that the best thing to rush to is to find ways to be a beginner, for goodness sake.
Yes.
Like, you're trying to find the weak points in your training. Beginners have weak points. Beginners have things they haven't covered because they've never done it before. Advanced people are doing the same shit. So
My one word of
so
advice would be always have an aim to have an aim.
Oh. I mean, at first it just sounds like you're saying the same word twice. Then you think about it more, and you smoke that blunt, and now you're thinking all the possibilities. Wow, that's something to ponder. Let's wrap it up. We're getting to too many awkward pauses now. I think it's time to. Yeah, the flow's just completely gone. Yeah, we're back to beginners, guys.
Fuckwits.
Collapsed.
All right, guys. I think I need to wrap this up.
Adios.
Peace up, A-Town.
I hope he sees you. Thank you for watching the Forge podcast. If you enjoyed it, we'd love for you to subscribe. If you want to find out more about us, check the description. And as always, thank you for listening.